Gemini 3.6 Flash hit 219.6 tokens per second in independent testing, which puts it at number 3 fastest out of 185 models, and Antigravity starts at $0 a month. If you're running heavy API workloads, that speed gap translates directly to money. Google shipped Gemini 3.6 Flash in July 2026, so this is as current as it gets, and I'm running both through 5 head-to-head tests to see who actually comes out ahead. The thing is, one of these is a model and the other is a platform, and that distinction changes which one you should pay for entirely, which is exactly where the conditional verdict lands. My name is Brian, and I'm in these tools 12 hours a day, so you don't have to be. And every number here traces back to official pricing pages, model cards, and independent benchmarks both companies actually publish. This one is for developers deciding between raw API access and a managed coding platform, where the wrong pick costs you real dollars per million tokens. Test 1. Cost. If you're calling an API a million times a month, the pricing model you pick decides whether you're on a coffee budget or a car payment. And these two products land in very different places. Gemini 3.6 Flash runs at $1.50 input and $7.50 output per million tokens, and Antigravity starts at $0 a month. What I found is pretty interesting. Gemini 3.6 Flash cut output. Token costs 17% compared to 3.5 Flash, and with cache hits, you're down to 0.15 per million tokens, which is a 90% discount. Antigravity doesn't publish a per token rate at all. It's subscription only, free tier, then a $20 Pro plan, up to $200 a month Ultra Max. So these are just structurally different pricing models. Now, before you call this one for Gemini 3.6 Flash, take it with a grain of salt because these products aren't really comparable on price. If you're a solo dev who doesn't want to watch a token meter, Antigravity's free tier is genuinely better for your wallet. But if you're running a production pipeline with predictable volume, the per token rate on Gemini 3.6 Flash probably wins, and it depends on your usage pattern way more than the headline number. So cost is a tie, and what actually happened is these two products live on completely different pricing layers, so there's no clean comparison to make. Gemini 3.6 Flash wins on raw to token economics, Antigravity wins on accessibility for individuals, and neither takes this one outright, which puts the scoreboard at 0-0, one tied. Test 2. Coding benchmark performance. Deep SWE jumped from 37% to 49% on Gemini 3.6 Flash, which sounds like a big deal. But a 12-point gain on a coding eval doesn't automatically mean your actual pull requests get done faster or cleaner. And you want to know what that number really means before you commit to a tool for a 3-month project. What surprised me is that Google's own benchmark shows Gemini 3.6 Flash at 49% on Deep SWE, up from 37%, and it uses 65% fewer output tokens doing it. But when I checked independent testing on artificial analysis, the intelligence index score sits at 50, which basically matches 3.5 Flash. So the internal numbers look great while the external numbers are kind of flat, and I couldn't find any platform-level coding scores for Antigravity anywhere, only the models running inside it. Coding benchmarks, no winner, and I'll be straight with you. The Deep SWE jump looked like Gemini 3.6 Flash would pull ahead cleanly, but independent evals tell a different story, and Antigravity doesn't publish platform-level scores at all. So you can't call a winner when half the data is missing, which keeps the tally at 0-0, two tied. Test 3. Speed. A freelancer running an agentic coding loop all day knows this feeling. You send a task, you wait, you context switch, you lose your train of thought, and by the time the response lands, you've forgotten what you were building. Because token generation speed is what decides whether your agent loop runs in seconds or minutes across a full workday. So here's what I found. Gemini 3.6 Flash clocks in at 219.6 output tokens per second on artificial analysis, which puts it at number 3 out of 185 models. And that's a real measured number. But for Antigravity, I couldn't find a published speed figure anywhere. Not on their site, not in any benchmark I looked at. And Google does claim lower latency for agentic workflows, but that's a vendor claim with no independent measurement behind it. Speed is a no-winner tie, and this one stings a little because Gemini 3.6 Flash has a genuinely impressive measured number. But Antigravity is a platform rather than a model, so comparing their speeds is kind of like comparing a car engine to a whole garage, and no winner gets awarded when only one side has data, which keeps it at still 0-0, now 3 tied. Alright, so context, limits, and deployment are coming up next, and those two tests are where the model versus platform gap gets really concrete. Context window size could decide whether Gemini 3.6 Flash can handle your entire codebase in a single pass, and deployment coverage decides whether you can even run your preferred tool on your machine without paying anything. Test 4. Context and output limits. 1 million tokens is roughly 1,500 pages of text in a single pass, and if your context window cuts out halfway through a large codebase refactor, you're not just annoyed. You're restarting the task, reprompting, and burning extra tokens to get back to where you were, which is a real workflow cost that adds up fast on a big project. What I looked at here, Gemini 3.6 Flash has a confirmed 1,048,576 input token context window and a 65,536 output token cap, which is genuinely generous for long code generation tasks. But for Antigravity, I couldn't find a published context limit anywhere, and since it's a platform that routes to models, the limit probably depends on which model it's running underneath, but there's no official number to point to. Context and output limits, another no-winner result. Gemini 3.6 Flash has a massive, verified context window, but Antigravity just doesn't publish the equivalent data, so I can't score it fairly, and one-sided data means no winner, which keeps the running tally at 0-0, 4 tied, and I'll be honest, that's kind of wild at this point. Test 5. Deployment and modality. A startup dev on a Linux machine who also needs to process PDF invoices alongside their code needs a tool that runs everywhere and handles more than just text, because if your tool only works on one OS or only takes text input, you're either buying a second tool or doing manual work that should be automated. So here's what we got. Gemini 3.6 Flash handles text, image, video, audio, and PDF input, which is pretty much every modality you'd realistically need. And it runs through the Gemini API, AI Studio, Vertex AI, and Android Studio, while Antigravity runs free on macOS, Linux, and Windows, and routes to models from Google, Anthropic, and OpenAI. So you're not locked into one vendor's model inside the platform. Now, before you score this, the comparison isn't really apples to apples. Gemini 3.6 Flash wins on input modalities because it's a model that processes data. Antigravity wins on cross-platform access because it's an IDE you install on your machine, and they're solving different problems at different layers, so calling one better than the other on deployment kind of misses the point of what each one actually is. Deployment and modality is a tie, and this is the one I least expected to end that way. Gemini 3.6 Flash has the richer input support, Antigravity has broader OS coverage and multi-vendor routing. And neither one clearly beats the other because they operate at completely different layers, so the final scoreboard lands at 0-0, all 5 tied. Okay, so where does Gemini 3.6 Flash clearly win? Speed, 219.6 tokens per second, number 3 out of 185 models, measured and verified. Context, a full 1 million token window with 65,536 output tokens for long code tasks. And per token cost, 150 input, 750 output per million tokens, with a 90% cash discount if you hit repeated context. And where does Antigravity clearly win? $0 a month to start, no token meter running in the background, and a flat $20 pro plan if you want more. Plus it runs free on macOS, Linux, and Windows, so there's no OS lock-in. And it routes to models from Google, Anthropic, and OpenAI inside one platform, so you're not stuck with a single vendor's output quality. Alright, so here's the honest verdict. 5 tests in, and it's 0-0 across the board, because these two products aren't really competing with each other. So if you need raw model performance, 219.6 tokens per second, a 1 million token context window, and cheap per token pricing, Go Gemini 3.6 Flash via API, and if you want a managed coding agent with a free tier and no token anxiety, Antigravity is the pick. Model first, Gemini 3.6 Flash. Platform, first, Antigravity. If you're still on the fence about which coding agent actually automates the most without you babysitting it, I did a full breakdown called Windsurf versus Cursor that goes deep on real workflow automation rather than just benchmarks. And that one will help you figure out which platform layer actually fits how you work day to day.